Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be back because, boy, this parenting thing doesn't let up for a minute, does it? We have these kids here. I mean, honestly, they're here every morning and they are a blessing and they are an opportunity and they are a challenge and they are complicated and so are we. So I was really glad to be invited to talk about this particular topic because if you looked at the marketing materials for this, you saw we're going to talk about compromise, we're going to talk about compliance, and we're going to talk about consequences. And those can feel like you might have looked at this and thought, okay, I like the idea of compromise where everybody is taking some sort of role in making sure that what we all need as a family is happening. And compliance, boy, that sounds great, doesn't it? But consequences, when we all have to live together, when everybody's mood affects everyone else, consequences feel really hard and sometimes really harsh. As we've talked together about on Boost, it can feel like you're not being compassionate if you give your kids consequences when they are struggling with a different structure and with a new experience, just like we are. But I am hoping that by the end of today, you'll really transparently understand why having boundaries and giving consequences for not living within those boundaries is the most compassionate thing that you can do as a parent. In Judaism, we learn to put boundaries around that which we value the most. And the example I like to give a lot, and I may have given it to some of you already, is of the Torah. The Torah is incredibly valued to us. There's nothing more valuable and no thing more valuable. And so what do? Well, we don't just put it on a book with pages. No, we write it on a scroll that has to be rolled and protect itself. And then it's wrapped in a belt. And then it's covered with cloth. And then we decorate it with more layers. And then we place it in a cabinet that often has a curtain and certainly has doors. And then we place that cabinet in a room that has doors that don't lead directly outside. It leads to an antechamber, and then that room can have doors. So is it to keep people from the Torah? Is it to keep it hidden or mysterious? It is not. It is to put boundaries around that which we value most, to protect it and to protect us so that we don't accidentally treat this incredibly important object with less than the value that it deserves. Well, the same thing is true of our family and of our kids. We put boundaries around them to remind them and to remind us that we value this so much. We value this relationship. We value this child. We value this structure of our family so very much that we have to protect it from ourselves and from each other and from the outside world. And it's in those boundaries that we say, hey, these things are okay and these things are not okay. And if these things that are not okay start to happen, there are consequences. When we don't give any consequences, we leave our kids with a sense that maybe they're rules and maybe they're not. We leave kids with this idea that if they're not strong enough 100% of the time to motivate themselves to follow all those rules, that's it. The world will fall into chaos. But we are the backstop for our children's willpower. We are the backstop for our children's memory. We are the backstop for our children's knowledge and self-control and self-regulation. If they came out of the womb knowing how to do for themselves and control themselves and regulate themselves, they wouldn't need parents. They need us to be that backstop. And a lot of that backstop is saying, hey, we're going to remind you about the boundaries, but we will also give consequences to help you be more motivated to stay within those boundaries, and also to remind you next time of why it's worth it. We're going to talk today about what some appropriate consequences are, how to talk to our kids about consequences with compassion. But I really want you to remember that having those boundaries and having consequences for breaking them, they are inherently compassionate. And they get us to the compliance that we need, that our family needs, that Hashem asks of us for our families to work well together. And boy, our family dynamics are really under a microscope right now, aren't they? Every single thing that you ever read on your kid's progress report, you're now really looking at in their bedroom or in their living room or in their dynamics with their siblings. And speaking of siblings, siblings are a great reason that we need to give consequences. Because although, and we're going to talk about this a lot, we don't give the exact same rules and boundaries and consequences to every child for everything, and we shouldn't, having no consequences when you break a boundary is often infuriating and definitely confusing for the other kids in the family. So if we want them to know boundaries exist and you need to do your best to live inside them and live with the consequences when you choose not to or when you forget, then that helps them understand what the whole world is going to be like. And if there are no consequences at home, then they will feel more and more shocked and betrayed by the world when they get out there. One of the things that I know we're going to talk about, and I'm probably even going to repeat this in the time that we have together, is this idea of having different rules or different consequences for different kids. It's really hard. Because one of the things that young kids think and adults know isn't true, little kids think that fair and equal are the same thing. Now, as an adult, sometimes I think that too. If you get a bigger piece of cake than me, well, then that's not equal and it's not fair, and I want the bigger piece of cake, or at least want our pieces of cake to be the same size. But I know that sitting right next to my 6-year-old while they try to do a math problem is totally appropriate and fair to that child. And talking to my 16-year-old about their math, but promising not to sit right next to them while they do it and watch everything and ask them if they maybe want to hold the pencil a little differently, and did they remember to put the name at the top of the paper, and are they going to check their work, and is that really what the teacher wanted? Not doing that with my 16-year-old is appropriate and fair. Equal would be treating both of them exactly the same. Fair is treating each of them according to their needs and their abilities in the moment that they are now. Now, if your kids are anything like mine, they may look back and say, when I was 6, you didn't do that with me. That's not fair. Okay, so what about that? What if you have 2 kids who are the same age and need different things? Well, that's when we do differentiated discipline. Differentiated education is something that a lot of your kids' educators work really hard on. And a really good example, easy to understand, they even did it when I was a kid, example of differentiated instruction was different spelling lists. So in a class of 2nd graders, even way back in the 80s, a teacher might have said to the class, okay, we're going to do a pre-test for this week's spelling block, and everybody take out your papers. And there might have been 30 words on there. And the teacher would take those, collect them, and mark them, and then put you in different spelling lists for that week. Because maybe I understand EE and how to spell those words, but I don't understand EA. And maybe Adrienne understands EE and EA, but she doesn't understand E consonant E. So we have to be on the spelling list that helps us where we are. And even though maybe she and I are the exact same age and we're best friends and we think we do everything the same, she knows something that I don't, and maybe I know something that she doesn't. So here we are getting differentiated instruction. Well, you, as an expert in your kids, know that your kids need differentiated boundaries and differentiated consequences. And just like in so many other things, you don't have to explain that to your child's satisfaction. You can try if that's part of your culture and your family, but it is enough for you to know that you're doing the right thing for each child for the right reasons. Fair and equal are not the same thing. In a world where, please God, I'm able to send my kids to overnight camp, it would be equal for my 4-year-old nephew to go to overnight camp with his older brother who's 14. But it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to either of those kids. It wouldn't be fair to the camp because that 4-year-old is not developmentally ready to go to overnight camp. Now, it might be unfair if when that kiddo is 14 and they're ready to go, but it's my baby and I don't want to send them, maybe that's unfair. But differentiated discipline is totally appropriate. It's exactly what our families need from us. So, okay, I think this is a great time to stop my talking about theory and let's get into the realities of it. Adrienne, will you come back to me, my darling? Let's talk about the questions that people have, because I think this is a really good time to see how this plays out in the realities of our, sheltering at home lives.
I have to tell you, Deb, I'm mortified because Now I understand what I did wrong.
Oh no.
I can't even tell you. This just, if it was just the last 10 minutes for my life, Diane knew I'm going to be such a good grandmother.
You are.
Oh,
None of
okay,
us really ever questioned that you were going to be an amazing booby.
okay, thank you. Thank you, because whoa, did I make mistakes? Okay, so I'm going to give you some of the questions which came into me, and it's interesting because they are almost dovetailed into what you're talking about. So they'll give us a chance to reiterate some of it. So let me just go to the first one. Oh, I love this. How to balance giving different kids their own attention, but more so, how to provide appropriate encouragement and discipline when they behave differently. So if after we all clean up, for example, we get to go to a fun activity together, but what if one kid didn't help out?
So that's a great example of this. And this is a place where you can have what I call at home informed consent. So if you say, hey, you guys, we need time to clean up from dinner, and the plan is to have movie night or a board game or whatever the fun activity is afterwards, but everybody has to pitch in. Then you're watching, and one of your kids is doing what I call the professional hangback, right? They're not making a big fuss about not participating. They're just taking like, I cleared my dish. Oh, and then I got distracted by something across the room. Or I had to go to the bathroom for exactly as long as it took for everything to get cleaned up.
So that was my trick growing up. That's what I used to do.
Awesome. So what the hard work here as a parent is not knowing what to do. It's noticing while it's happening. Because if you want informed consent and you want to feel really righteous about your boundaries and enforcing them, you got to notice it while it's happening. So you've got to be able to say, hey, sweetheart, I notice that you are not stepping up as much as you could be in the cleanup, and I do not want to have to ask you to step back and not play or tell you that you can't play in the board game. So please hustle. Show me your work. It's the problem that a lot of us have as parents is that we're not able to pay attention to everything all the time. So maybe I go to the bathroom, I come back and I hear, he didn't blah, 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 and I'm the only one who da, 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 da. And then and then because I'm an only child. So one of the hard lessons I had to learn as a parent is that if I try and intervene in that sibling squabbling, I don't mean fighting or bullying, then it's my job to get involved. With that bickering, the only thing I can be guaranteed to be is wrong. So, right. So if I jump in and I try to make a pronouncement about something I didn't see with my own eyes, then I really struggle. So what I'll often do in that situation is say, okay, if that's true, then hang on, because I still see 4 things that need to be done. And I would like to see everybody do one of them. So I have 4 kids. So everybody does one of them, but I'm still getting yeah, but that was the only thing he did, and da, 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 da. I will sometimes take that child alone where we can't be overheard if that's possible in your home, and look them in the eye and be like, did you slack? If you told me you slacked, then we can come up with a consequence together. But if you didn't, it's going to be a thing for the rest of the night, maybe the rest of the week. And if they say, no, I really didn't, I did this and this and this, then I'll say, okay. And if they're still earning your trust, if there's not something in the last 2 days that they looked you straight in the eye and lied about, which totally happens, but if they have your trust, then you say, okay, you have my trust, so I'm going with it. And I'll say, you deserve my trust on this. And if they can look me in the eye and be like, I do. And I'm not saying they can't do that and have it be a bald-faced lie at that moment, but you're giving them a couple of opportunities to come clean. And one of the boundaries that I have in my house is that you get a consequence for doing something wrong, but you get a 10 times consequence for looking me in the eye and lying. And my kids know that, and they believe me. So, so if one of my kids could then be like, really? Because I have this video of our entire cleanup and you sat on the couch, well, you're totally busted. I mean,
oh, okay. So if you're busted, there is a next layer of consequence.
Yeah. So one of the ground rules that I've always had with my kids is I say, when you do something wrong, and did you hear what I said there, Adrienne? I say when, not if.
Okay.
When you do something wrong, because resilience is about building our kids' certainty that things will go not as they wished, not as they hoped, not as they wanted sometimes, not if. So when you do something wrong, if you choose then to come to me and let me know about it, or you own it, you will have a consequence for the thing you did and put an extra brick in the trust wall that we build together.
Can I ask you something? Just a second. Can I ask you something? If we could get a recording of this Zoom, would you recommend playing it for your kids to tell them this is the strategy I'm going to use in the house now? This is the doctor that talked about
Oh,
it.
totally. Throw me under the bus. One of the things that, so I talk a lot about having kids do chores, and I always say to parents, so your kids are going to hate that you came tonight, but totally blame me, because I'm going to tell you that they're capable of so much more than you're asking of them. And I would say in terms of behavior and communication about behavior, they are capable of more than you're asking of them. But it asks a lot of you. And right now, many of us are tired. There are
Right.
3
Right.
phases to this upheaval, and
Okay.
most of us are finished with the entrance phase.
Yeah.
We know we're in it. We're now in the endurance phase. And the
Right.
endurance phase, without an obvious end date, is really where it tests our mettle. The exit phase, which is the last phase, when we know we know that we've been told there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we have to figure out how to integrate that and how to make choices about that and all that. That's
Right.
hard. We'll talk about that maybe on some other webinar, but this endurance phase, this is where the cracks really show in
So
our own
true.
confidence and imposter syndrome, in the self-esteem or the confidence or the communication skills issues that our kids have naturally, normally at different ages and at different developmental stages. You're going to remember this developmental stage of each of your kids because you're living and breathing it in a way that we just don't. Even stay-at-home parents who are really enmeshed with their kids, we're getting deeper now than we've ever
Yeah.
had a chance to get before.
Yeah. You're unbelievable. Can I ask another question?
Let's do it.
There's so many great ones. I can't decide. Okay, let me pick this one. Oh, this is really dovetails to what you were talking about. Sense of justice or fairness is a huge challenge in our household. One child has special needs and plays video games during online therapy. This is not okay with my other kid, who then also wants to play video games during school time. And this is just one example.
There's so many examples. I bet every household has examples of differentiated rules that infuriate the kid who that looks so easy. Why don't I get to do that? Even when it's just an age difference, when the 3-year-old doesn't have to do chores because they'd break everything or stab themselves in the eye, but the 7-year-old and the 17-year-old and everybody in between does have to. So there are a couple of things. You need to, I think, really look at this. The first thing with your child who isn't special needs is to have empathy. Yep, that's frustrating. And as I've said before, but I think it's a really worthwhile tweet, bumper sticker to remind yourself, you can have empathy for your child's frustration or sadness without changing your boundary. You can have genuine empathy. We're often afraid to show empathy to our kids because we think then the next logical step is to change the rule.
Just give me a quick kind of mindless definition of this differentiation that you could say to a kid. That's because in this house, we don't. Yeah.
So that's because in this house, we do our best to give each person what they need and get from each person everything they're capable of giving.
Oh, that's a good line. Say that again. Repeat that.
And it's a little bit of like Marxism or communism, right? We give each person what they need, and we ask from every person what they're capable of giving. But I want you to look for something with that non-special needs child who's stepping up, even though they hate it and they're cranky about it and salty about it. Look for something that that child gets to do or be or experience with you. Mind you, I didn't say have. This isn't about possessions. But get to do or be or experience maybe with you or maybe on their own that your special needs child can't because they're not ready for it. So that they can see that there are challenges to being more abled and there are obligations to being more abled, but that there are perks as well.
Beautiful. Okay, here's another one. How do I fix my young adult behaviors now? Since they think that they remember how I treated them when they were children and each wanted to be the favorite. There's movies about that. I try to correct their memories, but it's their memories, not mine. Even if I try to explain to them all that I love each of them and every one of them, it's not enough. They still need to hear that they are right in remembering their memories and look at what I did then to so-and-so. So even if I apologize, it doesn't seem to work. Oi, Claire, you and I are in the same boat. So now I am trying to, this thing keeps jumping. Even now, I'm trying to make new positive memories to balance out some of the hurt memories that I wasn't aware of back then. And
So
yeah,
I hear you saying, Rabbi Claire, that you are experiencing some balance sheet struggles. You feel like there's this balance sheet and there's more debt than you were even aware of on that balance sheet. And so now you're trying to have savings to match it. And I would say, let go of that model if you can. If you feel that you have things to make tshuva about, to apologize for and try and repair, then that's totally valid. And I believe you if you think that's true. If you don't think it's true and they do, then therapy, to figure out, where that balance really lies, therapy with a clergy person, therapy with a therapist, whatever it is. But you're right that their memories are theirs. You're right that their feelings are theirs. And you're falling into this trap of even though you're saying, I know I can't fix it, you're still trying to fix it. And so I would encourage you to stop trying to fix it and live with integrity now.
wow.
Apologize for that which you think you need to apologize for, and move forward and say, this is who I am. And when they pour these memories out on you, they can do that once or twice per memory, but it can't be a constant hair shirt that you wear. So when they pour those memories out, ask them, are you looking for empathy? Are you looking for me to tell you if I feel like I owe you an apology? What is it you're hoping I can give you here? And they need to accept that your memories are yours and your feelings are yours, and they're not less valid than your children's memories, but you don't have to swear it. I think you're right to know that you won't. And you asked a question here that I think a lot of parents have, imposter syndrome. I mentioned imposter syndrome, so let me define it very quickly. This idea that, boy, my kids would be better off with somebody else as their parent. I act, I say I'm the mom or the dad, but I'm not good at this, or I don't know what I'm doing. Somebody else earlier asked a question that I saw in the list that was about this, like, how am I supposed to soothe my kids when I'm also uncertain? And I also don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So this idea that I'm the future teller, I'm the fortune teller, I'm the truth sayer, and I don't know what the future or the truth is, that imposter syndrome is very real. And you asked a question, how do I fake it until I make it? And I want to spin that to a Jewish idea. The Jewish belief about mitzvot is that you do the right thing, and faith will follow. And maybe faith looks different for every person. And I don't know, in my own journey, if faith actually does always follow, but it's not to fake it till you make it. It's do it till you believe it.
Wow, wow, wow. So essentially you're saying, Naseh v'nishma. We will do, and then we will understand.
Right. And so just keep doing it. If you believe it's the right thing, and I'm not talking about taking someone else's value system and just doing that. I'm saying your value system is to treat your kids well now. I hear it in your question. Do that. Keep doing that. And I hope that you will come to believe that you're good at doing that and that it's valuable. But even if you don't, you will have done it.
I cannot wait to re-listen to this recording. Honestly, it's so difficult for me because I'm here co-hosting with you, and yet all I want to do is like listen and ask questions. Okay, here's another one. What suggestions do you have for my 10-year-old girl who's struggling in the time of isolation? She says video calls make her miss her friends more. Her friends on the calls are all doing apps that we don't allow. How can we support her in a time like this? Oh.
There's two different questions there. One is, how do I help my child with their difficult, uncomfortable feelings in this time, and how things that I thought would fix it, like Zoom calls, aren't, she says they're making it hard,
Right.
Which isn't necessarily the same as making it worse, right? It is bringing those feelings up to the top for her. It makes her miss them more, but she might, if you asked her, still say she chooses to see them and miss them more than to not do the calls at all. So don't make the assumption that that means she shouldn't do the calls. So about that, I would say empathy, gratitude. We've talked about this before. Empathy for her feelings, gratitude that she's willing to share them with you and tell you how she's feeling, and faith in her. She can do hard things. So if she chooses to have the calls and do those hard things because it's worth it to her, then like show her, give her some props for that. And if not, ask her for some solutions. Or is there anything within the boundaries that we have and that you've set? Is there anything that she thinks would make it better? The second half of your question is, you're watching her see that you have different rules than her friends' families do. That's always been true. That's not new. And the strength that you need to say, yep, different families, different rules, hold on to that strength, because for your family, you're the expert and you're right. Even if you're wrong about one app, in general, you are right to say our boundaries, our rules, and yes, it's going to be different than other families. Now, there are some kids who aren't allowed to do those things. She probably even knows some kids who aren't allowed to do those things, but she's not telling you about those families because they don't support her argument. She's a smart kid. That's okay. Again, about her disappointment in not being allowed to do some of the things that she sees her friends doing. You can have empathy for her frustration without changing your rule.
Whoa. Oh my. Okay, now, we're supposed to stop at 12:30 and it's 12:28.
Okay.
Or 1:28 rather, we're supposed to stop. But is it okay if we keep going for a little bit longer? There's so many questions and
I can, if you guys can, absolutely. I'll just say to people who are saying, oh, well, but I have something to do right now and I got to click off. If you can come back later and listen to it, I am going to do a little bit of wrap up at the end.
Okay, fantastic. I hope everyone stays. Okay, so I'm going to ask you another question. There's so many good ones. Oh gosh. All right. How do you get your husband on the same page with differentiated discipline?
Oh,
he thinks that all rules should apply to all kids. Otherwise, rest won't follow the rules. We have 4 kids, 16, 13 and a half, 12, and 6 and a half.
Totally get it. So I actually just wanted to answer the first 6 words of your question. How do you get your husband on the same page? Right?
That's a question. Yeah.
This is a perennial parenting issue. How do you get your co-parent on the same page as you? And so I'm going to answer that first because it's more generalizable, and then I'll drill down to the particular thing about the differentiated. The generalizable question of how do you get your co-parent on the same page is, 1, you talk to them about it when nobody else can hear, because that's respect. 2, you don't make it out like you're the decision maker and they're the assistant, or you're the majority leader and they're the minority leader and your decision is going to go, but it would be nice if you guys agreed. This has to be bipartisan decision making. The third thing, and this is where the money is that you have to help them see how the structure or the rule or the boundary or whatever it is that you want them to agree to gets to a goal they have for your family, that they have for your children, not just you. So an example, in this case, differentiated instruction, and here's that nugget that's just for that particular piece. Your husband, once he thinks about it, is probably mature enough to recognize that equal and fair are not the same thing. Now, are you already aware that he wants your kids as adults to be productive, engaged employees and people who aren't entitled and think they should have a bit of everything and that everything should be the way they want it to? Probably he has at some point in your parenting of however many kid years you have between you, 40 or something like I have, he's said something like that. He's had some experience with some other adult who's been entitled or wanted something just because somebody else had it and it was unfair, and said, boy, our kids aren't going to be like that. So here's your chance. You help him understand how differentiated discipline gets your kids closer to that life lesson that he already wants them to learn.
Deb, do you have any information or ideas about, and perhaps you can send it to me later, about this whole theory of differentiated parenting? Is there data on this that we can read?
So most of this research has been done in education about differentiated instruction, and how we used to, when, in the 1970s and 80s, we'd classify kids by what we perceived to be their intelligence level,
Right.
Stick them in a reading group, stick them in a math group, and that's where they stayed. And then
Right.
we started to realize in a growth mindset that people can get smarter as they work harder at something.
Right.
You're not fixed. Well, you're not only not fixed in your education, you're not fixed in your own motivation. You're not fixed in your own ability to self-discipline. You're not fixed in your own resilience. That's all. There are growth possibilities in all of them. You do have a starting point. Everybody has a nature starting point, and those are all different, but everyone can move the ball down the field in each of those areas. And so this growth mindset requires differentiation, because each of my kids starts at a slightly different place with each of those things and everything else.
Wow. Okay, I'm asking you another one. Any advice for parents with returning freshman college kids coming back due to the virus? What's appropriate in terms of consequences with them?
So for freshmen, I actually think that's a little bit easier than older kids. Some of us are having kids come back who are by far not kids, are 21 or 26 or 30 because of their own circumstances. It was safer, healthier, more financially realistic for them to come back into the home, or maybe they were coming to help. So here's what I want to say. You have to figure out if developmentally, not by age, your college age kid is still a kid or is actually an adult.
How do you determine that? How do you figure that out?
I bet everybody knows. I bet as they think about each of their kids, they know if they're developmentally. Now, I don't necessarily just mean how they act when you're with you. I mean their best self that you've seen when they're at work or when they're at school or when they're at someone else's home. Is it in there? If they're capable of adult behavior, well, you know, most of the time, then what I really want you to think about is a really respectful, open, clear communication, conversation with them about what's possible. Ask them, start by asking, what are your concerns about living here right now? Okay, here are some of my concerns about you living here right now. What are your hopes? Cool, here are my hopes. What do you think the structure is that we need? Here's some of the structure that I've been thinking about. If you can continue to behave like an adult relative who contributes and is thoughtful and is helpful, then has some needs, then we will continue to treat you like an adult relative who can contribute and be helpful, but also has some needs and some boundaries that they want to set themselves.
Jeez.
If I see these behaviors, and boy, it's so easy to regress when you hit your mom or dad's house.
Oh my gosh, I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm 61 and I turn into an infant.
Right, totally. So and I would just own it with them. I would say, I get how easy it will be, especially in your sibling relationships or when you're not feeling well, you're tired, to just regress. But I'm going to really encourage you to behave like you would behave if you were a guest at someone else's house, because you're not a guest here. I love you and you're welcome here, but I don't want to go back to treating you like I had to when you were 16, and you don't want me to.